Hello, I'm Ellie Christman, and I'm going to be a junior at Lehigh University. I'm studying chemical engineering and business, and today I'm going to be talking about the effect of preceramic oligomer ring size on the processing of polymer-derived SiCNO fibers. My purpose this summer for my research was to determine the effect of silazine ring size on the processing of polymer-derived SiCNO fibers. But a little bit broader than that, I was given the opportunity to go to Kansas State University for 4 weeks, where I was able to work in a new lab with other students who had different backgrounds, experience levels, and majors. So I was really able to learn so much, and I also was able to learn many different characterization techniques. So I overall had such a great experience, and it was also great for me to explore the Midwest because I'd never been there before. So now a little bit about polymer-derived ceramics. So these are generally made through the controlled thermal decomposition or pyrolysis of organosilicon polymers, as shown on the right. And these can be used in fiber reinforced composites. However, a main drawback of these is that many of these preceramic polymers are not spinnable. So you can't make fibers out of them if they're not spinnable. So that was a main focus of my investigation. So I was assigned the Preceramic Oligomer 3-TTCSC, and I was assigned this because in the past, Zonkin had worked with 4-TTCSC, which is very similar. It just has an extra silicon and it just, yeah, so it's a little bit larger. So we thought that this would be a good comparison point to sort of compare the smaller sized ring with Zonkin's work. So that was sort of the basis for my research. And I used the spinning agent PAA, which is the same one that Zonkin used, and it's a long chain organic polymer. And this just allows me to create the fibers. So to make the preceramic polymer, I had to mix the preceramic oligomer with dicumyl peroxide or DCP at a 1% weight ratio. And so that's how I made the preceramic polymer. And then I began the summer by preparing a powder. So I mixed PAA with the preceramic polymer to create a paste, and this paste ended up having a 66% weight ratio of the preceramic polymer. I then cross-linked this and crushed it into a powder. So to cross-link it, I gradually heated it to 160 degrees Celsius, and then that sat in air for 16 hours in the oven. And I was then able to pyrolyze the powder at 3 different temperatures. So I pyrolyzed it at 800, 1000, and 1200 for 5 minutes with a 2 degrees Celsius per minute heating rate. And from there, I was able to perform some characterizations. So I got this XPS data. So here are the survey scans I obtained, and the presence of the Si, C, N, and O confirmed to me that the preceramic oligomer, in fact, can be transformed into a ceramic powder, so SiCNO powder. And this had a mass yield reaching as much as 85%. So this was a really great result for me. And I then began to make my fibers. So here's just an outline of all of the samples that I made. So here are the powder samples, and then the 2 fiber samples, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about now, were pyrolyzed at 800 and 1200. So here's the overall process for creating the fibers. And I'll start by talking about creating the gel. So to create the gel, I mixed PAA and 3-TTCSC and DCP first, and then I added DiH2O. And from there, I experimented with many different weight ratios of the preceramic polymer, but I found that 33% weight ratio of it was definitely the best. So now I'll talk about spinning fibers. So to begin, I created aluminum boats by just folding aluminum foil into this boat shape. So it's about 20 to 25 centimeters long, and then placing the aluminum tape on each end. And so then I would draw the fibers using 2 pairs of tweezers and place them on the aluminum boat. So they, as you can see here, they just stick to the aluminum tape. And while I was spinning the fibers, I usually add a few drops of water to prevent the gel from drying out. So next, I'll talk about cross-linking. So I cross-linked the fibers in the oven, similar to the powder, at 160 degrees Celsius in air for 16 hours. And here's some images, so you can see that the fibers are pretty long and uniform. And next I'll talk about the pyrolysis. So to prepare the fibers for pyrolysis, I first removed them from the aluminum boats, and then I wrap them around this graphite paper. So as you can see, this doesn't contaminate the fibers because it's just made of carbon, and it helps keep the tension in the fibers. So as you can see here, the fibers are still long and they haven't really shrunk a lot. So that was a really good system for that. And for the fibers, I pyrolyzed them in argon again at 800 degrees Celsius or 1200 for 5 minutes, again with a heating rate of 2 degrees Celsius per minute. And so here's some images of the pyrolyzed fibers. So here are some at 800, and as you can see, the surface is pretty uniform as well as the diameter. However, for the 1200, the surface doesn't really have as much of a uniform sort of structure, and the diameter is also not very uniform. And then from there, I was able to do many different characterizations on these fibers. So now I'm going to share some of those results. So I will note at first that I did also create PAA fibers as a base sample, and they're just made of PAA and water. So as you can see here, some XPS data. This is the pyrolyzed PAA, which I pyrolyze at 800 degrees Celsius. The fibers pyrolyzed at 800 degrees Celsius, and then the other pyrolyzed fibers at 1200. So as you can see, again, similar to the powder, I wasn't sure if this was actually going to create the ceramic SiCon fibers. So this allowed me to confirm that it was in fact creating those ceramic fibers. And I also collected some Raman data. So as you can see for the pyrolyzed fibers at 1200, the D and G bands are pretty well defined. So this indicates that the carbon is in a graphene-like network. However, for the fibers pyrolyzed at 800, the bands are pretty weak and overlapping. So the microstructure was not able to be resolved. I also collected FTIR data. So as you can see here in the FTIR of the liquid, it matches with the structure. So that confirmed that our sample was pure. And this also showed me a little bit more about the cross-linking mechanism. So as you can see, this is the spectrum of the 3-TT-CSC cross-linked with PAA. So you can see that there's a decrease in the NH and SiCH3 peaks, which indicates that there was cross-linking via dehydrogenation or evolution of CH4 groups. And you can also see that the SiCH double bonded to CH2, that indicates that the vinyl groups contributed to the polymerization. And finally, you can see the appearance of the SiO peak suggests that there was ring opening where the nitrogen was replaced with oxygen during the cross-linking in air. So this really gave me some great information. And here I also did some FTIR with my pyrolyzed samples, but as you can see, the pyrolyzed spectra have no strong peaks and they're not very useful because there's no hydrogen in them, and there's really not much there. So my conclusions overall from this project were that the 33% weight of the preceramic polymer in the PAA water solution is the optimal ratio. That was what gave me the best fibers. Additionally, the smaller size of the oligomer ring has an increased spinability at the cost of more brittle fibers. So I was actually able to spin fibers at a higher ratio, but they turned out way more brittle and not very great. So, and finally, the fibers that were produced, they were ceramic and they contained free carbon. So that was another thing that we weren't sure about since this preceramic oligomer has not been studied before. So in the future, I'm going to be working on perfecting the recipe for the 33% weight fibers. I did struggle with finding the right amount of water to add because I noticed that the amount of water I added definitely affected the quality of the fibers. So I'll be working a little bit more on that in the future. Also, I will be doing more testing on the effect of pyrolysis temperature on the amount of free carbon phase present. So you probably noticed that I pyrolyzed the powders at 3 temperatures, but I have not yet pyrolyzed my fibers at 1000. So I'm planning to do that in the future. And I'm also going to be traveling to Sorbonne University to perform NMR analysis on my samples to study the structural evolution. So I have a really exciting future ahead. And I would just like to acknowledge that our financial support from the National Science Foundation is greatly appreciated. Um, and thank you so much for listening. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.